There is no space for real politics. So money is extremely important. If you discuss with MPs or you question MPs about a new legislative initiative, please ask them, where do you think the money will come from for this initiative? Because usually MPs and politicians, they can have brilliant ideas, but if there is no money, even if there will be a law in place at some point, it cannot be implemented because there's a lack of money, a lack of funding. So that's always the bottleneck. In my country, there was a former Minister of Budget, and he once told me, Peter, I am more important than the Prime Minister, because I have the keys in my hands. I am in charge of the budget. I will tell them, if they, whatever they propose, I can tell them, yes, we have the money in the budget, or I will tell them, we don't have any money in the budget. But I have the keys in my hand for whatever they want to do. Keep an eye on that whenever you set up an interview with politicians. The third, very, very important issue, what parliamentarians do or should do, is holding the government to account. People in the government, the ministers, they cannot just do whatever they want. They have to show up in parliament whenever requested and listen to the questions they get and provide proper answers to the questions they get in parliament. I see that often, also in your country, we have had many problems with that. Ministers, they say, oh, we don't have time, we don't go to parliament, we don't need to talk to you, we run our own business. That's not fair to the citizens. The citizens, and through them the parliamentarians, they have the right, also the obligation, to follow up and to question the government and to check thoroughly what the government is doing. That's very, very important. That's one of the basic rules. This is what we call oversight. Oversight is not only just overseeing what the government is doing, so knowing what the government is doing, it is also controlling. It has this element of controlling what the government is doing. And if they do it wrongly, they can maybe vote a motion of no confidence, trying to get rid of some people in the government, trying to get rid of the whole government, go for early elections. That is normally the role of parliament. Very important role. The fourth, and that's where you come into the game, parliamentarians, members of parliament, also have to represent the citizens. You get your mandate, you are elected by the citizens, so you as an MP, you are accountable to the citizens. They expect you to go home, to talk to them, to meet them. And I see, for example, in many countries here in the region, these members of parliament, and they say, but we need constituency offices, we need a special office in the municipality where we can go to and then meet the citizens. In my country, when I was a member of parliament, we didn't have this. We simply went to the nearby pub at the corner of the street, and we told the citizens every Friday at 8 o'clock in the evening, I will be there, please, if you have any questions, you get a beer and ask your question, and we will try to deal with it. That's democracy at work, I would say. Let's now briefly look into the first issue. That's the issue of the legislative process, as we call it. Most legislation, there are a few exceptions, most legislation is introduced not by members of parliament, but by the government. The reason is that the government has a lot of capacities available, they have specialized staff to draft and prepare legislation. And there's a lot of things that they know that should be in place. They make a deal with the European Union, for example, on the famous European acquis communautaire, as we call it. That's European legislation that in order to become one day a member of the European Union, that you need to put in place. The government, because it's all technical issues, they draft the legislation. Once the law is ready, they send it to Parliament. The moment the law is in Parliament, then only the business starts. And then again, ministers often complaining, but it takes so long. Why do we need 6 months, maybe sometimes 1 year before the Parliament approves a law that we send them? The reason is that the political process, it's about communication in the end. It's about talking to each other. It's about trying to reach an agreement on possible amendments or changes of the law to see whether you agree or don't agree with the law. And that takes time. That's a normal process of democracy. I could give you a thesis, and we will do it later on with the quiz, you will see that as well, but I could give you a thesis, and you could maybe need 3 weeks before all of you together would be able to agree. Now, in order to make this process a bit more easy in Parliament, if of course you have a Parliament of, let's say, 120 people, it depends a little bit on the Parliament we are talking about. If all these people have to agree on something, that will never work. 120 people, that's very difficult. So therefore, Parliaments are used to do 2 things. First of all, you establish a system of political groups. People normally elected on the same list, or even on different lists, they can join each other and say, we are one political group. From a political group, you can expect that they usually will have the same point of view on a particular issue. If, for example, I introduce tomorrow the budget to Parliament, I can expect that all political groups belonging to the majority will more or less support this draft budget. The opposition, also the other political groups, maybe not accept the budget, but within a group they will have the same point of view, they will defend the same position. That's the idea behind it. Sometimes you have dissidents, they don't follow this rule, so that makes it a bit more complicated as well in Parliament. The second issue, what we try to do in Parliament to make it more functioning and more effective, we establish committees. Committees is like a mirror of this plenary setting, but at a smaller scale, where the balance is exactly the same as in the plenary between majority and opposition. Smaller number of people, and that makes it easier to discuss and to reach an agreement, a compromise on anything. But the problem is, in a parliament also, in the end, it's only the whole parliament who can decide on anything. So meaning if you decide something in your committee, defense reform, for example, or procurement of new tanks, you can discuss in your committee at a small scale with 10, 15 people, but in the end the final green light for this cannot be given only by the committee, but needs to be given by the whole parliament. So it goes back to the plenary where you are going to approve it once again, give the green light. So what you see here, you have basically these 3 stages. First of all, the government submits the law to the parliament, then you start the discussion in parliament. The first step in parliament is you will first try to measure the temperature, to see, is this law, is that really what we need, or is that acceptable, is the line with the constitution, is the line with international standards eventually, is this okay? If there you say, yes, that's okay, then you start the process. You give this law to a specific committee. If it's a defense issue, you are the member of the chairperson of defense, I give you the law on defense, and you discuss it with your members of your committee, as long as it takes. You see whether this is a more or less okay law, you discuss in principle the whole law in general, as a concept it's a good idea to have this law on defense. And then you advise the plenary again and you tell them, okay, that looks quite okay. If the plenary then says, yes, that's okay, then you go back, it goes back to the committee, and then you start the second round of discussion. The second round of discussion is a detailed discussion, proposing amendments on the law, changing the law, and then the changed law, the law as you change it in the committee, will then be finalized in the report, and this report is going again, end of the second reading they call that, to the plenary. The plenary will, the whole parliament will then have a discussion again and vote and approve the law. That's normally the end of the whole process, but sometimes there is a third step. Because imagine that you as a committee, you agree on a new law on defense. Submit it to the plenary, and then the plenary says, what you propose there, that looks nice, but we don't agree with that. Then you are in trouble. The third step means that you can send your law back to the committee and tell them, it's not good enough, you have to review it again, last stage, and then we approve it only. That's the third step. Often not used, not needed, but sometimes it is possible to have this also introduced. So that's a bit about the legislative process. If you have any questions, don't hesitate, ask them. Now, the second issue, budget. I told you, money, that's the key issue in any political environment. Wherever you go, it's always about the money in the end. That's the only thing that really matters, at least at a political level. Because without money, you cannot do anything. Now, how does it look like? The left side is a bit small, but anyway. Early in the year, the government will start defining its policies for the next year. So normally as of February, March, the government will start thinking, what are we going to do in 2014? What should we do then? It's an election year, but there are also many other priorities. We need to build maybe some new schools. We need to raise the pensions. We need to boost the employment in our country. So there are a whole list of priorities. That's the first step. They will then make a design, try to define on how are we going to achieve this? How are we going, for example, to increase the pensions? What do we need in order to increase the pensions? What do we need in order to increase employment, to boost employment in our country? So that's, and then they will make a plan. That's the policy as we call it. Step one. The second issue is that for each and every department, for each ministry, they will define what we call the budget ceilings. It's quite simple. When you are at home and you look